Welcome back, everyone. It's Eric from Rare Candy here. Today we are going to be taking a look at another Cosmic Eclipse deck profile. This time it's going to be the new Greens Blastoise Piplup GX deck. So this actually is the same list that was featured in our recent testing rounds video as well. So if you guys do want to see how this deck looks in action, I will of course have a link down below in the description for you to check that out. And just something to keep in mind too, if you guys are unfamiliar with those testing rounds videos we do here on the channel, they usually feature kind of our early, somewhat more unrefined list that we've used to start testing with. So that means there might be a few things in here we can potentially tweak or improve upon, or might still be kind of in flux. Just something to kind of keep in mind as we do go through this deck profile. So Blastoise Piplup GX, I think, is one of the more interesting tag teams out of the starter or Kanto starter tag teams coming out in this set. And I think there's been some consideration as playing it just as like a one-of in some decks like Clagnag or maybe the new Arceus Palkia deck. But I wanted to see if we could build around this just as its own thing, since it does have a pretty interesting suite of attacks at its disposal. So let's take a look at it. This is going to look kind of similar to a Reshizar deck at a glance, or Green's Reshizar, I should say. Since we are playing 4 copies of Kyogre, this fills a similar role as the Volcanion we've seen in Reshizar decks. But Kyogre is a basic Pokemon, and we're really just playing it for the first attack. For a colorless energy, you attach up to 2 water energies from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon. So this is going to be the way we are going to attempt to get Blastoise Piplup up and running just a little bit quicker if possible in the early game. And then it does have a single attack here, or I'm sorry, a single damaging attack here as well. For 2 water and 2 colors does 130, and you discard an energy from this Pokemon. So not too great of a second attack here. We're really probably never going to use this, really just for this first attack. And also, much like with Volcanion and Reshizar decks, you really don't even mind this thing getting knocked out, because your opponent has to knock out, even if they knock out 2 of these, they still have to knock out 2 tag teams no matter what to win a game. So this thing going down at some point is really pretty inconsequential, which is really nice. So up next from there, we have, of course, the main attacker of the deck, Blastoise Piplup GX. So a new tag team Pokemon, and its first attack here for 2 water and a colorless does 150. You attach any number of water energy from your hand to your Pokemon any way that you like, and then you heal 50 from each of those Pokemon when the energy is attached there. So this is pretty cool, because not only can we stream attackers thanks to this attack, but also we can overcommit energy to a single attacker if we need to, just to heal it off, which is really nice. So even though this is a little bit slower getting up and running as opposed to something like Green's Reshizard, whereas they have Welder and stuff, once you get this first attack going with Blastoise Piplup, it kind of carries itself from there and can set up all of the rest of your attackers afterwards. And it does have a GX attack for 2 water and a colorless does 100, and your opponent's paralyzed. But if you have 3 extra water energy, then you do 150 more damage. So 250 plus paralysis. That's decent. You do one-shot certain things, like you do one-shot Pikarom, you one-shot the new Megalopony Jigglypuff as an example. But you are going to be a little bit shy of knocking out things like Mewtwo Mew and some of the other 270 HP tag teams, which is admittedly a bit of a bummer. You can tell this card was printed when Japan still had Choice Band in the format. Pretty obvious when designing this card. But nevertheless, I think it's fine. We're going to be pretty content, I think, two-shotting most things. We have a ton of healing at our disposal in this deck. So I think it's really not the end of the world that we're usually not going to be one-shotting things. So that's going to be the entire Pokemon line, guys. I think there is also consideration for Megalopony Jigglypuff GX, since that does slot nicely in here, since we are playing the Greens engine. But right now, just the Kyogres and Blastoise for the moment. Up next, though, we have 4 copies of Green's Exploration, one of the main search cards we have in the deck. Of course, you guys are probably familiar with this by now. You can only play it if you have no Pokemon in play with abilities, and then you search your deck for 2 trainer cards, put them into your hand. Super powerful searching method that we have here, especially since we have no Pokemon with abilities. So up next from there, we have kind of an interesting inclusion, but bear with me here. We have 4 copies of TV Reporter. So TV Reporter, not the best supporter we have currently in standard format. But it says you draw 3 and then you discard a card from your hand afterwards. But if you have no cards in hand, you can't play TV Reporter, I believe is the exact wording. Oh no, if you have no cards in deck, you can't play this card. Okay, yeah, that's what it is. But yeah, so the reason we're playing this, it might look really strange, but we're playing it because of the discarding effect. That's really the reason we're playing this card. So typically, think of a deck like Guardian. It would typically play something like Coach Trainer, or in the case of Reshizar, they would play Welder. and they have these other like draw-based supporter cards outside of greens. We don't really have a great one that slots nicely in here, but TV Reporter is one of our better options just because we can draw 3 and also discard water energy to get back into play with our Kyogres. So this is going to be one of the ways we can actually pitch away energy early on in the game. And of course, just draw 3, pretty decent, especially in a deck where we're just continually trying to grow our hand size. So TV Reporter, it's not the best supporter, but it's probably the closest thing that fills that role of something like a coach trainer or a welder and some of the other greens-based decks. I do want to point out another consideration to take some of the spots for this is actually Crash Awake. I think that's a card that does have a good bit of potential in this deck because you can pitch away 2 water energies, search your deck for maybe the Kyogre and a switch, and then get your Blastoise Piplup up and running. So that's actually a card I really do want to try out in this deck going forward. But right now I'm trying out the TV Reporter. But of course, guys, feel free to play around with that and see how that might work for you. But right now, currently, that's what we are going to be settling on. So up next from there, we have some of the new tag team supporters. The first of which is going to be the new Misty and Lorelei. So Misty and Lorelei says you search your deck for 3 water energy, put them into your hand. And then the secondary effect on this, much like the other tag supporters coming out, has a bonus effect. And this one is you discard 5 cards from your hand, and then you get to reuse one of your water Pokemon's GX attacks, which is a pretty insane effect. Most of the time we aren't really playing it for that though. We are really mainly using it for this first effect just to find water energy, because we can search a deck for 3 water energy and accelerate all of it down with Blastoise Piplup, healing 150 in the process, or maybe setting up a new attacker. So up next from there, we have 1 copy of Mallow and Lana, another tag team supporter. The first effect says we just switch our active with one of our bench Pokemon, but the secondary effect, you can discard 2 cards from your hand, and then you heal 120 from the new active Pokemon. So this is going to be another healing option that we have. We have a lot of different tanking options in this deck, and this is just going to be another one in our arsenal. And then from there, we have 1 copy of Cynthia and Caitlin to round out our supporters. So this is going to be the last tag team supporter we're going to look at here. You put a supporter card from your discard back into your hand as long as it's not another Cynthia and Caitlin. But then the secondary effect, you discard 1 card from your hand and draw 3. So this is really cool because we can get back maybe a greens and draw some cards for a turn, which is, kind of makes it better than Lusamine in a lot of situations, because we can, unlike Lusamine, you can still see additional cards in a turn despite getting back a supporter. So that's going to be it for our supporter cards. Going on to our stadiums that we have in the deck, we have 3 copies of Power Plant. This is going to be pretty much a staple for most greens deck. Power Plant is just very, very good. Since we are playing no Pokemon with abilities, we can kind of capitalize on this and punish our opponents' decks that do play abilities like the Mewtwo Mews, the Dedennes, Keldeo GX, whatever it might be. It's going to show off all abilities for all Pokemon GX and EX. So just a nice inclusion, pretty much any greens deck. Going on from there, we do play some other stadiums though. We played 1 copy of Viridian Forest. So this is going to be another discarding option that we have to maybe pitch away some energy with our Kyogres to get back into play. So we discard a card from our hand and then search our deck for a basic energy we find there. So not only can, like I said, we can pitch away stuff to get back and play with Kyogre, but also even in the late game sometimes it's just nice being able to grab an energy to throw down with Blastoise Piplup as well. And then from there, we have 1 copy of Shrine of Punishment to round out the stadium cards. So Shrine of Punishment is going to look like an odd inclusion, but it's really to fix our math on a few things. One of the big things with this is that we are just 10 damage shy of knocking out the Dene GX, which is super unfortunate. If we had Choice Band, this really wouldn't be a big issue, but unfortunately that's not the case. So Shrine of Punishment is going to be very, very good against something like the Dene GX or even like Jirachi GX, any GX with 160 HP. So we can throw down the Shrine, and then, we can gust up like a Dedenne, pick it off with Blastoise Piplup. So also, too, if Shrine does go unchecked, it actually does fix your math against a couple of other things. Think like something like Mewtwo Mew GX. They have 270 HP, so if they don't bump the Shrine, they are going to go below the 250 HP mark, which is going to allow you to be able to actually take a one-shot with your GX attack on those types of Pokemon. But like I said, it's primarily for the Dedennes. That way we can have the option to pick them off at some point if we choose to. Going on from there, we have 4 copies of Pokegear 3.0, another staple in a lot of greens decks. So we look at the top 7 cards of our deck, pick a supporter card we find there. We can't play Dedenne GX in our own deck or Jirachi, so we need additional consistency boosting methods, and Pokegear is going to kind of fill that role here. Up next from there, we have 4 copies of Custom Catcher. So I think greens decks in particular are actually one of the few decks post Cosmic Eclipse that still have a strong argument to playing Custom Catcher. I know a lot of decks are just going to switch immediately over to Great Catcher, which I think is correct in a lot of decks. But since we can easily find both of these thanks to greens, I think there's a lot of merit to still playing this card. So of course, Custom Catcher, it has two different effects. If you play one from hand, you draw until you have 3 cards in hand. Not that great, but the secondary effect, if you play 2 at the same time, you get to switch your opponent's active with one of their bench Pokemon. So it's going to be good against one prize decks like Malamar, just as an example, to pick up or pick off their Jirachis on their bench or Malamars, whatever it might be. And we don't have to discard cards from our hand, whereas we do with Great Catcher. But nevertheless, we are actually still playing one copy of Great Catcher, and this is something I'm still kind of going back and forth on with greens decks in general going forward. I'm not sure if you just want to play Custom Catcher. You might want to play maybe 2 customs, 2 greats, and just having that split. Right now, I am going for a little bit of a different route, going for 4 and 1. I'm playing the one Great Catcher just because it's a little bit easier to make use of, because you don't need an additional copy in your hand. And it does have synergy with Kyogre because we can just discard 2 water energies and then get those energies back into play with Kyogre. So I've done this a few times. Like first turn of the game, I'll greens for Great Catcher, bring up something that has kind of a clunky retreat cost, and then accelerate energies to my Blastoise Piplup. So for that reason, I think you actually could make an argument for this particular greens deck to go 2 and 2. But yeah, this is something I think is that I really want to keep experimenting with going forward. Right now, I don't have a firm answer for you guys on what is the correct split, if there is a split at all to be had going forward. But especially in this deck, at the very least, since there is natural synergy, I think at least one Great Catcher is going to be merited here. Next up from there, we have another new powerful card from Cosmic Eclipse. That is going to be Tag Whistle. So we get search your deck for 2 tag team cards, put it into our hand. And one thing that's important to note, it says tag team cards, not tag team Pokemon. So that means not only can we grab Blastoise Piplup, but we can also grab our tag team supporters. So this immediately replaces Cherish Ball, I think, in any tag team greens-based deck. So we can grab, maybe first turn, grab a Blastoise Piplup and a Misty and Lorelei, just as an example, or 2 Blastoise Piplups. So Tag Whistle, fantastic card in our greens-based tag team decks going forward. Next up, we have 2 copies of Energy Spinner. Energy Spinner gets you a basic energy card from your deck, but if it's your first turn, if you're going second, you get 3 basic energies out of your deck instead. So we can greens for this whenever we need it and get those energies straight into our hand. And also, we're playing the second copy here as well, just because if we burn our first one, maybe on turn 1, we still want another out at guaranteeing an energy maybe in the mid to late game. Next up from there, guys, we have 2 copies of Tag Switch. So Tag Switch says you move up to 2 energies from one of your tag team Pokemon to another. Or not to another tag team, but to any Pokemon, I should say. So this is going to be good in a number of different situations. The 2 most common situations I've run into with this deck where Tag Switch is good is a lot of times if you're attacking with Blastoise Piplup and it gets swung on, then sometimes you have to commit additional energy beyond its base attack cost to heal it. And then in those situations, you can Tag Switch the energy off later to a fresh Blastoise Piplup. But also beyond that, we play 2 copies of Switch. So sometimes there are some instances where you switch into a fresh Blastoise Piplup and Tag Switch the energy off of your damaged one onto a fresh one. So Switch also just very good. Everything in the deck has a clunky retreat cost, so very, very important in this deck. Up from there, we have 2 copies of Reset Stamp as well, another staple in greens decks, just because we can search them out whenever we might want them. Especially if your opponent is forced to deal with 1 or 2 Kyogres early on, and they get put down to like 4, or they knock out 1 or 2 of these and then take a knockout on Blastoise Piplup, and they've taken maybe around 4 prizes. Being able to reset stamp them over and over to like a 2-card hand or maybe a 3-card hand, whatever it might be, is just going to be really, really good. Especially in conjunction with Power Plant. I think Stamp Plant is just one of the strongest combos we have in this current format, much like the old Garbotoxin N combo that we saw in previous formats. This kind of replicates that. Up next from there, we have 3 copies of Great Potion. This is going to be another healing method we have access to. So we heal 50 from from our active Pokemon GX. So this in conjunction with Malnana, in conjunction with Splash Maker, the first attack on Blastoise Piplup, just another way we can tank hits and ensure that our Blastoise Piplups don't go down. And then from there, we have a couple of different Pokemon tool cards to round out this list here. So the first of which is going to be Choice Helmet. So Choice Helmet is going to be another way we can tank hits. So Choice Helmet is going to reduce our damage taken by 30 by our opponent's Pokemon GX. So this is primarily in here actually for Reshiram and Zekrom GX because they cap out at 270, and they are just, I think, a very efficient attacker against us because our whole deck is based around not getting knocked out in one hit, and they can do that pretty reliably. So Choice Helmet actually is going to prevent them from doing that. But of course, even outside of that matchup, this has utility against a number of other things. There's just a ton of GXs running around, and Choice Helmet is another card that we have at our disposal to change those 2-hit knockouts into 3-hit knockouts on our opponent. And then from there, we have one copy of Counter Gain as well. So Counter Gain is a tool. It's another option we have to maybe get our attackers going a little bit more quickly. So it's a tool card, and it's going to reduce our attack cost by a colorless energy if we are behind on prizes. So Blastoise Piplup luckily has a colorless energy, its attack cost, and actually Kyogre does as well, which is pretty nice. But let's say first turn we attach to Blastoise Piplup, and then second turn, or on our opponent's next turn, they knock out our Kyogre. From there, we can just attach a water energy, greens for counter gain, and start attacking with Blastoise Piplup. So we need all the help to get up and running with this deck. Like I said, once you get your first attack off with Blastoise Piplup, your deck is pretty good from there. It carries itself through the rest of the game, but just getting to that point sometimes can be a little sluggish. So Counter Gain is another way we can help expedite that process a little bit. So going on from there, we just have some basic energy to round out the list. We have 4, 8, 12 copies of water energy to round out our list here. So guys, that is going to be Blastoise Piplup GX. I think there's a lot of cool things going on with this deck. There's a ton of healing options, much like in the way that Gardevoir Sylveon has, but you have a really great typing. Being able to knock out a lot of the fire stuff that's running around is definitely very, very good. And just being able, with your own attacker, to be able to continually set up other attackers and heal yourself over and over is something I do like. And I think makes Blastoise Piplup worth experimenting on its own and not just as a one-up backup attacker in certain decks, like I mentioned at the beginning of this deck profile. But you guys, of course, feel free to experiment with this list and, of course, any of the additional options I kind of mentioned here. So there's a bunch of options I think you can mess with going forward, but I hope this is at least a good starting point for you guys to begin testing with. But of course, guys, stay tuned to the channel as we have a ton of Cosmic Eclipse coverage coming up over the next several weeks. And if you did enjoy this content, feel free to like and subscribe, and consider supporting this channel by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/rarecandytcg, or by picking up some merch from our online store, rarecandytcg.com. It would mean a lot. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.